Okay. Fine. Yes, you got me. All spell mechanics are just kicker. Evoke, kicker. Overload, that's kicker all right. Bestow, you guessed it, kicker. But there's something that's common with these and so many other mechanics like them. And today I want to talk about something we've noticed as a problem with them and how we've tried to solve it. And it's probably the kind of issue you might have never thought about. Good morning, Magic. I'm Gavin Verhey from Wizards of the Coast, and let's get started. Okay, so let's just start with kicker. Even though mechanics like buyback predated kicker, we should start with the meme, you know? As most of you probably know, kicker cards work like this. You can pay the mana cost, or you can pay a printed additional cost to kick them up for a bonus effect. So if you were fortunate enough to draft Probe in Invasion, the set kicker debuted in, you could cast it for 3 or kick it for 5. Also, don't pass Probe in Invasion Limited, that card's totally cracked. And it even evolved throughout the block. In Planeshift, we saw a double kicker on the much loved Battle Mages. And then this continues into Apocalypse with the much less loved Volvers. What even is a Volver anyway? All right, great. So what? Well, let's see this evolve over time a bit. Let's look ahead to the next set, Odyssey. It debuts one of the greatest mechanics of all time, Flashback. This mechanic you can cast up front and then pay a set mana cost to flash it back. Sometimes more, sometimes less. I'm sure you probably know this one too. So kicker, on the one hand, with cards like Kavu Aggressor and Duskwalker, and flashback on the other, with cards like Shatter of the Squirrel and Morgue Theft. I'd say both mechanics are quite well known. Most of you have probably played with both plenty of times. Okay, so now I want to run an experiment, and you'll have to tell me the results in the comments down below. Can you remember the cost to cast one of those cards for kicker? And can you remember the cost to flash back one of those cards with flashback? You had Kavu Aggressor, the red creature, and Duskwalker, the black creature, with kicker, and Shatter of the Squirrel, the green spell, and Morgue Theft, the black spell, as flashback cards. Think about it for a second. I just showed the cards to you a moment ago. How'd you do? Post your results in the comments down below. There's a decent chance you got all of them. If so, good job. But what we've found is it's a lot easier to remember and use a cost when it's all written out and you can see it all together. With kicker, you have to do math. Cost A plus cost B equals cost C. With flashback, it's all right there and you can visually remember the total cost. It depends what kind of learner you are, but generally it's easier to remember flashback's way of writing it. Now, this wasn't the reason we wrote Flashback this way at the time. Flashback had loads of other reasons to do that. For example, doing cheaper cost than the mana cost to flashback. But it is something noticeable at some level, especially when you have to do that math. So let's flash forward many years to Return to Ravnica. We're introducing Overload as the is it keyword. Lead designer of the set, Eric Lauer, notices it's not only easier to just remember that one upgraded cost, but it also means you don't have to do math in-game to figure it out. It may sound silly and like something that wouldn't happen, but in the heat of a game, it is really easy to just count wrong or read a pip of mana wrong and be off. The pieces of the design space you lose are extremely minimal, and the design gains are there in return. It even lets you do things like change the total color of the mana you're paying to cast the card if you want, as we'd see years later in Modern Horizons 2. This change to Overload worked out great, and with similar mechanics, we started templating them this way instead. Bestow, in the very next block, it writes out the full cost instead of just having an additive kicker. Awaken, a couple blocks later in Battle for Zendikar, same deal. And this started to become the default. Not that we can't deviate where it makes sense. On mechanics like Escalate, for example, it needs to be written like kicker to make it work. And there still is value to backwards compatibility with cards that care about kicker. Fun fact, actually. In Zendikar Rising, there was a mechanic tried instead of kicker called Titan that was essentially just exactly kicker, but instead of being additive like kicker, it was written out like Awaken with one cost. The idea was trying for some remaining Eldrazi flavor. All the Titan costs were fully colorless, so you could play some of the effects in any deck. For example, Field Research had Titan 8 and draw 4 cards when you tightened it, meaning any deck could play it for 8 mana to draw 4 cards. But I digress. In any case, it was decided in Zendikar Rising to just go with Kicker. It is a good mechanic and people know it, even though the cost structure doesn't look like what we might use today. So don't worry, Kicker fans, the mechanic isn't going anywhere. In fact, it's even been upgraded to a deciduous mechanic, meaning we can use it as we see fit in sets. People know what Kicker is, so let's write cards that clearly use Kicker as Kicker. Hence, for example, the solo Kicker card in March of the Machine, Final Flourish, that I don't think anyone really batted an eye at. You'll see more of those in the future. Now, all of this is leading up to something in Outlaws of Thunder Junction, a new solution that helps this old problem a little bit. I mentioned there were reasons why we would want to do Kicker, even though generally we've moved to a new model where we can. So I want to show you a card with Spree. This is a new mechanic, and yes, it's very much like Kicker. In fact, it reminds me of those Volvers, but way cooler. You can pay any number of the additional costs on the card to get the effects you paid for. It's like Escalate Kicker or something. This mechanic wouldn't work, at least cleanly, with any style like Overload or Awakened did. Each cost can be combined together, so it needed to be written like Kicker. But I want to call your attention to something very minor and I think cool, the plus. You'll find it in the mana cost in the top right of the card, as well as in the text box. This helps make it clear you're adding these numbers together. For example, Unfortunate Accident is always a single black mana, plus 2 in a black and/or 1. It's never just a single black, and it makes it clear that you need to pay all the costs to get all the effects. I especially like the plus in the mana cost of the card, so when you're fanning your hand or looking at a card quickly, you know something else is going on, and that you should pay attention that the card doesn't really just cost a single mana. And while this doesn't actually help with all the issues Kicker causes, it is a nice little quality of life improvement. And if we're going to do a new mechanic that's done up like Kicker, I'm glad we tried something like this here. It makes a lot of sense to me. I'd love to know though what you think about the plus. Like it? Dislike it? Let me know in the comments down below. There's a lot of very tiny things like this we think about and discuss plenty as a group, and today was pulling the curtain back to reveal a behind the scenes look at one of them. I really hope you enjoyed this. Let me know if so and would like to see more like it. I'll talk with you again soon. And in the meantime, may you find some real pluses to playing Magic. You got this. I look forward to you posting all your speculation on them in the comments down below. Ready? Here we go. Hint number 1. There is a new card that creates Sand Warrior tokens. Azizar Tamar fans, rejoice. Hint number 2. There is a 2-drop creature